Okay, I'm here with Bradley Marco. Could you tell me a bit about yourself?
Sure. Oh, that's one of those questions when someone asks you, you immediately just go brain dead because you don't actually know anything about yourself.
Okay, you have a YouTube channel. That's how I
I
found
do.
out about you. What do you do on your YouTube channel?
Okay, so I started my channel actually only in December of last year, so it's quite a fresh YouTube channel. But I am a content creator in the market of anime and manga.
Okay, is that your real library behind you or a green screen?
No, that's my library.
Excellent. I haven't been able to keep my manga over the years. I always donate it to the library as soon as I'm done with it because I move around a lot as a wildlife biologist. So
Oh,
I got started on anime and manga when I was 16. I went up to visit my cousins in Alaska. We were doing a big family work project to help their dad get the a new wing of the house up, and they were really into Gundam Wing right then, and they had
oh
every
man,
VHS in the
Gundam Wing.
series. Yeah, they had every VHS in the series in their room, and I would sneak down and watch it on my 15-minute breaks between cleaning copper pipes and nailing framework together.
Whoa.
So yeah, that was I liked that reaction when I said Gundam Wing. So
Oh yeah,
what
yeah. I
what,
mean,
what was your
I'm
introduction to
probably just
anime?
showing my age there, but Gundam Wing is definitely one of the first things that I grew up on.
I think it was one of the first ones that got imported into the States in a big way.
Oh wow.
Well, one of the first ones that wasn't Pokemon or Dragon Ball.
Yeah, yeah. What one of the anything other than Pokemon and Dragon Ball Z? Yeah, but no, I guess if we're talking about that, man, I've been watching anime since I was about 7, um, and yeah, some of the things that I started with were obviously Dragon Ball Z. That's always going to have a special place in my heart, just because I grew up with that from a young age. Then yeah, Gundam Wing was one of them. Other things like Evangelion, Escaflowne, and then I also had other things as well, like Sailor Moon was quite big when we were younger, so we watched a lot of Sailor Moon. Basically, anything that I could consume that was anime or sort of Japanese culture, I just started inhaling it from a young age, and yeah, I've just been doing it ever since.
Quick question on a side note. How long did it take you to stop being weirded out by the noses on Escaflowne?
I've never stopped being weirded out by the noses.
Took me about 20 or 30 episodes, I think, before my
I don't
brain
think
kind
I
of
ever got
integrated
over
it.
it. You just kind of learn to ignore it, I suppose.
Yeah, I remember that was quite the meme. It was almost
Oh yeah.
pre-internet days, but the adaptation period, because it was so good, everybody wanted to continue watching it, but the art style was just, it wasn't that it was a new art style, it was just left of most anime.
Definitely, yeah. It was very unique in that sense. Yeah, it's one of those shows where it kind of you look at it and you think, oh, that looks very different, but then you still get hooked on it anyway, don't you?
Yeah, yeah. The movie was a bit of a letdown when I finally saw it, I have to admit. I mean, it wasn't bad, but I'd been waiting, it took so long for it to get to the States
Oh wow, I don't
that,
actually think I've seen the movie.
yeah, it was just kind of a rehash of the entire plot done from a slightly different angle.
Oh right, I see. So
They
almost like a
decided that
recap, but with
they'd
a retake.
cornered the teenage girl market, so they decided to make this more of a gritty, kind of aimed more at the masculine market.
Oh right,
But
okay.
in doing this, I think it was that they did it in such a commercial and calculated way that they kind of stole some of the heart of the series out of it.
Oh right, man, I'll have to check it out if I ever find time, but I don't
Oh
know.
boy. Okay, so yeah, I actually too started. Well, technically, my YouTube channel is a bit older than that, but it had just been kind of sitting there. I'd used it in 2015 to advertise the first book I published,
All right,
and it'd just been kind of sitting there since then with my book trailer on it. And I really only started in earnest in about December.
okay.
I started with The Mandalorian. I started
Oh,
reviewing that because I was really enjoying it.
such a good show.
Yeah. So, kind of a quick question: What
Yeah.
do you have a favorite manga, and if so,
Oh, I'll tell you what, that is one of the hardest questions because my top, I guess I have I'm always adjusting like a top 10 list. Every time I read something new that I really like, I'm like, oh man, that needs to go on my top 10. And then I have to shift things around. So I never truly know what my favorite is. I guess I can tell you sort of some of my favorites right now. obviously Kaiju number 8 is something that I'm really digging at the moment. There's only
Oh yeah.
31 chapters, but my God, I'm really into Kaiju number 8. I think the manga that I'm reading ongoing that will always be my favorite. I've still got One Piece and Jujutsu Kaisen. Now I'm really big on. I've been collecting a lot of that. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I suppose I should just turn around and see what I've got.
Yeah. Well, I was really into DeGray Man, but then the series kept getting darker and darker,
Oh yeah, I've
and
got
it
the Grey
started to get
Man
a bit
down there.
depressing. But yeah.
The Grey Man is one of my oldest collections that I really want to finish. I've got 17 volumes down there, but they were some of the ones I collected from a young age. I think I was still quite a young teenager when I started collecting those. Yeah, The Grey Man's a really good manga.
Okay, now here's an obscure one. It was meant almost as an instructional manual, less entertainment, but it was written classic manga style.
Yeah.
It was called With the Light. Have you ever heard of that one?
With the lights, you know what? Something is niggling in the back of my brain that says I have heard of it.
There's
but I've
one
not read
in
it.
every library in the United States. It's tucked away, not even with the adult manga. It's usually tucked away with the adult manga,
Okay.
but it was autism awareness was significantly behind culturally in Japan
Okay.
in the early 2000s. And like a lot of people had never even heard of it. Their only frame of reference was the Japanese translation of Rain Man. So the government said, well, let's write a manga about it. And so they did. And it was a really well-written, touching story. They took real stories and kind of conglomerated them into the story of this one fictional family working through their son's autism.
Wow.
And so it was actually a very good manga, but because it was one of those series that there was nothing spectacular about it, so it never got a lot of attention, never got an anime. But like I said, it's considered such a good story and such a useful reference tool that I know in the U.S. I haven't yet to see a library that doesn't have a copy.
Wow. I have not heard of that, but I'm really interested in that now. It sounds like one of those titles that might have been a bit before their time, so they kind of just flew under the radar in that sense. But
Yeah.
what was it called? I want to write that down.
I'm pretty sure it was With the Light. It's a reference to how many people on the spectrum have a fascination with moving lights.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I've written that down, so I'm going to check it out. I will find it one way or another.
Okay, so I was just kind of you seem to know everything, so I was kind of been throwing darts around trying to test where you're. Okay, so the reason I contacted you did a video on Kaiju number 8, which I am really into. So when did you first notice Kaiju 8 and what really attracted you to it?
I can't remember the exact date, but it was sub 10 chapters. I think I started reading it when it was around 5-6 chapters out, something like that. I can't remember the exact time, but what attracted me to it was the fact that it was kaiju. I've always had a bit of an interest, not too deep, but if we're talking about titans like Godzilla, for example, I've always been interested in that. I don't have a lot of knowledge on it, but there's just something about giant monsters that's cool. So when I saw a title called Kaiju number 8, I already knew the term kaiju, so I decided to check it out. And I come from a design background. My occupation is actually in graphic design, but I've studied art and design and digital animation at university. So the first thing I always notice is always art. So I always subjectively look at that, and then I think to myself, I saw Kaiju number 8, and I thought to myself, man, this artwork's actually really cool. And the more I read, the cooler it got. It's got some of the most awesome like action panels that I've seen. Oh man, yeah, I really just fell in love with it straight away just from the art. And then as I read the story more and more, I've just been getting more and more into it. And it's reached a point now where it's at such a pinnacle that I can't wait for the next chapter.
Okay, I'm really glad to hear that because I have these technical questions and I know a little bit of. I've taken a few art classes. I'm a research biologist in my day job, so you need to be able to sketch something so that somebody can identify it. So no fancy angles, just really plain, simple. This is what you're looking.
This is your point across.
So I know enough about art to know that there's a lot going on there that I don't understand.
Okay.
And one of the things I really noticed about Kaiju number 8 is the action scenes are just so good. Even things like you wouldn't think of as an action scene. In that one scene where Vice Captain Hoshina is sitting at his desk looking over Kaiju number 8's and 9's data. The way he's posed in that first panel with his arms kind of up behind his head like he's stretching, you get such a feeling of movement from that one panel. It's like she took 6 different panels in succession and
Yeah.
compressed them into one in such a way that you could see all 6.
Yeah, and I
And
think that's when you start to see a mastery behind the draftsman, because there's just, like you said, there's just a way that they're conveying motion in a panel, and it's you see all that perspective. It's hard to get into words sometimes when you're trying to articulate how appreciative you are of scenes like that and how that is being conveyed to the reader. Absolutely.
and there was another question. I've noticed something, that when the artists are drawing Vice Captain Hoshina, it's especially in the first 10 or 20 chapters. I don't want to say they draw him better than the other characters, but they definitely, he seems more animated than the other characters. The movement lines especially, you get that feeling of that this one character is always a little more popping off the page than the other characters. And I don't know what it is, and I don't have anywhere near the vocabulary to articulate what the difference is between Hoshina and the other characters in those first chapters. Did you notice that? And if so, what is that?
I'll tell you what, I didn't really notice that so much until you just said it, but there probably is some intentional thought behind that, because if we look at Hoshina himself, he's a blade specialist, and his whole thing is sort of speed, maneuverability, how agile he can be on the battlefield. So there might be something there where the idea is to make him look like he is that fluid, and he has that kind of impact and emphasis on the readers. So I hadn't really thought about it until then, but you might actually be onto something.
And then, of course, there's just Kaiju number 8's design.
Yeah.
There is a certain balance with monsters design, I've noticed. The line between a repulsive monster and one that's very visually attractive is very, very thin. And there was an old American comic called Fury. It was a spin-off of the Buffy the Vampire Slayer series.
Okay.
And they have sort of an ally monster. And he was, when you looked at him in the series, he was terrifying, but visually attractive on some level. Then they showed some of the concept art where he had a full upper lip. And they said they didn't like that. And that design was not nearly as visually attractive. So they kind of took off the upper lip, like it had been ripped off in battle. And it made it a more visually attractive monster. And that's not something I would have ever thought of doing. It's just, clearly it was a bit of artistic inspiration. And when you look at Kaiju number 8 as compared to Kaiju's number 9 and 10, he's definitely a more attractive monster. And again, that sounds kind of weird, but again, I'm not really an artist and I don't have the vocabulary. But what do you think of his design?
I think it comes down to the fact that so those kaiju in question, they start to lean more towards humanoid, and I think there's definitely something when we look at how a reader would perceive characters. The more humanoid it is, the easier we find it to relate, or to, like you said in your words, there's something attractive about that sort of form. So when we look at that, yeah, I guess the closer it is to being humanoid in that sense, it's easy for us. I can't speak today. It's easier for us to, I don't know, just to perceive some sort of level of attraction from those characters, and what actually compels us to find those characters enjoyable. It separates, I guess another reason is it separates them from, I guess, our other kaiju, like the other big monsters, the Yoju and the Honju, and how they look, because they all look very more monster-like. There's less humanoid aspects about them. So by separating those to the big boys, yeah, I guess, yeah, I kind of went off on a tangent there, but
Hey, that's why I called you for your tangents. So, we could just spend the entire hour talking about the art. It's beautiful,
yeah,
and the whole team, because you that doesn't just come from the main mangaka. That's got to be her. The whole team working behind them.
Definitely.
But the storyline is just something special. And of course, the first and most obvious thing is that the main character is in his 30s, which is not unheard of for a shonen manga, but is on the less common side.
Yes.
So what I really appreciate that fact, obviously, as someone who's also in my 30s, I can I understand what it means. I really get, that feeling when he stands up and his joints pop and he goes, ah! You can really feel that.
Yeah.
But what were your thoughts on the creator's choice to make him a 30-year-old washout? At
Oh, I
least from his
mean,
perspective.
I'm not sure on the creator's thoughts, but it could be something along the lines of why we find it relatable. So that was another one of the things that attracted me to Kaiju number 8. With Kafka being in his 30s, I'm 31 myself, and I guess when I first saw his character, and like you said, he's going through these things like, he can't get out of bed in the morning without feeling his bones crack, and he just feels like that age is catching up to him now. When I read panels like that, it made me think, man, I can really relate to this character. And I think one of the biggest things that did it for me was his drive to want to reach his dream of joining the Defense Force, and he just kept feeling like he'd let himself down for not reaching those goals by the age of 30. I think he's 32, and I really sort of related to the idea that it doesn't matter what age you're getting to, there's still always an avenue where you can pursue your dreams. And I think that resonated with me mostly because let's take my YouTube channel, for example. I've only just started that, and it's going really well, but it's always something that I've had in the back of my mind that I wanted to do for years and years and years. And I guess finally taking that plunge to do it. But I remember having this whole internal conversation with myself where I was like, am I too old to start this now? Should I have started this 10 years ago when I was in my prime? Yeah, so I really related with him in that aspect. So I'm not sure where the artist or where the author sort of got their inspiration or their idea to make him that age, but it could be something along those lines.
Yeah. Okay, and now there's the story.
Oh, your voice is gone. Am I still here?
Yes,
Hello?
you are.
Oh, I can hear you now.
Okay.
You're back.
Must have just been an internet glitch.
Yeah, maybe.
So a lot of people during the first couple chapters were saying, "Oh, it's just an Attack on Titan ripoff," and there are a lot of commonalities, but that talk stopped really quickly. And my personal opinion is it's the classic C.S. Lewis thing. Don't worry about writing an original story; just focus on writing a good story, and the originality will come. And so I really enjoy that these creators do not appear to be self-conscious about whether or not they're writing an original story. They're just putting all their technical skill into it and writing a really good story. So were you part of that conversation early on?
I wasn't part of it, but I remember seeing some of it sort of pop up. I kind of just ignored it, to be honest, because I mean, Attack on Titan is one of my favorite manga as well. I'm really big fan of Attack on Titan, and that sort of, I guess I ignored that talk mostly because, like you've just made a point of, the artists and the authors, when they were putting this manga together, I'm sure that for me it shows the level of professionalism in being able to take inspiration from other things and make it your own. So like you just said, you don't have to focus so much on writing an original story as long as it's a really good story, and the originality will come on its own, and that's 100% true. So even if they did take inspiration from Attack on Titan, they have already they've molded it into their own thing now, and that's becoming more and more apparent as the chapters go by. And we have to remember how young this manga is as well. It's still only at 31 chapters. There's so much further that it can go.
Okay. So you say you've got a back history in graphic design. Mine is in the hard sciences. And one things, but when doing graphic design, especially if you had to work with figures moving, you really have to take into account physics and gravity to make something look real. So
you have to have an understanding for sure.
And one of the things that, as a hard scientist, one of the first things that really jumped off the page, took me out of the story and made me go, oh, cool, was the fact that they're sticking to a very, very scientifically grounded. They took that one great leap that any author is allowed, and they put kaiju in this world, but they leave them there as a natural force. And so the first moment I went, they did their research, was when, I think it was Kaiju number 8, the first big punch, and there was recoil, and you could see the ground shattering. And there were physical consequences to the world around them from these
Yeah.
titans taking blows at each other.
Yeah.
And I've been watching it fairly closely, and I'm no physicist. I know just enough to understand how animals interact. So I've been really, really appreciating watching them go at each other and the consequences it's having on the world around them,
Mhm.
and the long-term, and they're factoring in long-term consequences as well of just having this as a running aspect of this ecosystem.
Mhm.
And that's just one thing that's really, really made me appreciate this story, because there are none of the glaring scientifically inaccurate holes that make you flinch a little when you're reading something and they touch on your specialty and you're like, this is such a good story, but I really wish you hadn't done that.
Oh, I'm
And
glad you
so
brought
far
that
I
up.
haven't even
That's
found
not something.
one.
Sorry, say that again.
So far I haven't even found one that really took me out of the story
Okay.
and violated the rules of the world itself.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because I'm sure that's something that you would notice far sooner than I would. But I can definitely see where you're coming from, because I love that. I love that in the manga there's sort of like a level of realism in this world that isn't real, and I noticed it in things like I guess right at the beginning of the manga with Kafka being on the cleanup crew. They make a point of saying how long it takes to sort of dispose of the bodies. Um, he makes a point of saying that how can they actually clean up this mess within a week, because that's the time frame they've been given. And yeah, they might have some kaiju technology advanced tools to help make that job quicker, which is absolutely fine. But I love that it's still just not a quick job. They can't just click their fingers and get rid of it. There's no contrivance to sort of just make that disappear for the next kaiju to turn up. It's all very much impactful in the environment.
So, and did you notice the pattern on how they rate the kaiju, their destructive ability?
What do you mean by pattern? Do you mean like the scale
Yeah, the scale. Do you recognize the scale?
being kind of like earthquakes?
Yeah, it's a Richter scale. So
Yeah,
each level is 1,000 times more powerful than the one below it. So that
yeah,
was just struck me as being a very Japanese way, or I should say more of a very Pacific way of thinking about things. Because anybody who lives on the Pacific Rim, the threat of that natural disaster, and so I think that's kind of the inspiration behind the concept for how you deal with kaiju in this world. They're the earthquake. They're the ever constant, ever present thing that might show up and cause a bunch of destruction, but life has to move on. I was 5 years old. It was 4 days before my 5th birthday when the Loma Prieta earthquake hit California, where I was living. And it was terrifying. Everybody went outside and sat in their driveways and waited for the aftershocks to be over. But then you just got up and went on with your life.
I've never experienced an earthquake. It's not something we really get here. Maybe a mild thing. I don't know. I'm fairly certain I've never experienced an earthquake, but
Well,
it's
you
so funny. You
probably
bring
have. There's one pointers everywhere all the time. You just can't.
Oh, okay.
Humans are not capable of detecting them.
It's just that the I guess the magnitude's so low.
Yeah.
But it's so funny you brought that up, because one of my next videos coming out on Kaiju number 8 is I'm doing an explanation video on how the fortitude system works in Kaiju number 8. So obviously I'll bring up the information about the magnitude scale and stuff like that.
Yeah, the Richter scale.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned about cleanup. Now, I generally don't reread things. I don't have much time to read, but I keep having to go back and reread Kaiju number 8 because there's so much packed into these images.
Yeah, there are little
And
details.
especially this last chapter, because have you ever done martial arts?
Yeah.
So I took a few years of kung fu, and
Oh,
our Sifu
nice.
he's really very technically skilled.
Okay.
And he doesn't forbid it, but he does not encourage competitions until you're a black belt.
All right. Okay.
His goal is to teach you how to, if you get jumped in the street, survive.
Yeah, how you can
And so
defend
he's very
yourself.
big on technique and technical skill. And so I actually had to go through and look at each panel, because people were laughing how it looked like Kaiju number 8 was winding up for a Haikuden or a Kamehameha. I'm like, no, that's actually good kung fu the author's putting there. He didn't drop his elbow enough, but then he has to
Oh,
take
we,
the
this
elbow
was in the
rockets into
latest
account.
chapter, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
he kind of does like a pose kind of
he
with his
puts
fist,
his
doesn't he?
right leg back and then
Yeah.
drops his body down, and that
Yeah.
is 100% the form you take when doing a body hook. to
Okay.
prepare for a body hook, which was essentially what he was doing. It was just the body hook was way up above his head instead
Yeah.
of just over his shoulder,
Well,
like it
he's
would have been.
punching upwards essentially, isn't
Yeah.
he?
And it's the action. It sounds weird to say this about a manga, but the action was going so fast I had to stop and reread it 3 or 4 times just to follow what
It
was
does go
happening. And
fast,
yet,
actually. Yeah.
during the first reading, you don't lose anything important to the story. It's just
No.
there's so many extra details.
Yeah.
And so then, of course, I finished with that, and we have to wait till Golden Week is over to get our next chapter.
Yeah.
And so I went back through and I was rereading it. And I noticed something weird. Because now that he's captured, the big fear is that they're going to experiment on him and take samples and whatnot. And so I was kind of comforting myself with the thought, well, they don't need to take many samples from him because they have all the legs that Hoshina sliced off in their first confrontation.
Mm-hmm.
But then I was going back and rereading for an entirely different purpose. But I came across I think it's the first scene of chapter 21 when, help me out here. I'm really bad at pronouncing names that I've only read. Kikoru?
Shinami. Oh, yeah, Kikoru.
Yeah, Kikoru. She's sitting on top of the fungus kaiju, and it's clearly had its core destroyed because it's no longer a threat because she's sitting on it.
Okay,
But
yeah.
it's definitely still physically there. And we know there are entire industries based around collecting the kaiju body parts and disposing of them properly.
Yeah.
So the kaiju do not just normally disappear when you destroy their core.
No.
But the very, very first text box is the radio chatter saying, "Limb has dissipated, collection failed." And they're very matter of fact about it. And then they say they're initiating search. Now, this is in the context, Hoshina and Kafka have just had their big fight with Kafka's Kaiju number 8.
Mhm.
Hoshina chopped off, I think, I counted 5 total, but there were probably more. He severed 5 limbs, and it was the big point that Kaiju number 8 was having to expend a lot of energy to regenerate them. So that's
Yeah.
a fairly major plot point.
Mhm.
And then on, third or fourth reading, I noticed that it says limbs have dissipated, collection failed. So this is clearly not a new thing that they're
No.
just encountering for the first time. They're too matter of fact about it. They're not freaking out because the limbs just disappeared, but they were not able to get any physical samples of Kaiju number 8.
Right. That's interesting. Man, I need to go back and reread that chapter.
It really, really stuck out in my brain because I'm like, they made a huge deal.
You just saying it, I don't even remember reading that.
Well, I didn't remember reading it until I'd gone back on like the 4th time because you're so caught up in the drama.
Oh, definitely, yeah. Because it's probably one of those sort of just passing panels as well, where you're not really focusing too much on that specific dialogue. Yeah, I'm definitely going to go back and reread that.
So Kaiju number's 8 limbs, once they're severed and disconnected from his core, dissipate. And I'm actually more surprised I didn't catch that sooner because the whole problem of where this body comes from and where it goes to has been bugging me from the beginning. Because this creator is so beautifully following the laws of physics with the recoil and the positioning and the direction of each blow and movement. I know it can't be something that they've just missed or made a mistake on. Kafka's human body is not affected by what happens to his kaiju body other than the lack of other than experiencing an energy drain, because he's still got the same scars on his hands and the same muscle structure on his human hands when he transforms back. Now, he's never had to transform back while an arm is actively missing. He's always regenerated first.
True.
And what happens to his human body does not affect his kaiju body. So you're looking at 2 separate physical entities there. So where does the kaiju body come from and where does it go to? Because he doesn't lose mass. He didn't lose any mass after his confrontation with Hoshina, and he lost 5 limbs. So we're looking at 40, 50 pounds of mass there.
Yeah.
Bone and muscle. But
he
was still, he had not lost any mass from his human form when he transformed back. He was just exhausted. So you're looking at 2 completely separate bodies there. So, and that's a matter of the law of conservation of mass, which is closely tied to all the physics they have to know to get those action sequences so good. Okay. So I don't think it's just something they've missed. They've either ingrained it into the one big step away from reality and just saying this is how these kaiju work, but they still have to have some hand-wavy explanation. Is he pulling this body in and out of pocket space or what? What, any
I
theories
think
on
I
that?
think it's gonna be something to do with that weird bug he ate at the beginning. Because I said it before in one of my videos where I just talked about I think it was like 5 manga to read. Basically the first time I mentioned Kaiju number 8, I mentioned how the weird bug, in at least in the translation that I read, the bug says "I found you," and we've had
Yeah.
no more context since then about what that meant. Um, so this weird bug was specifically seeking out Kafka for some reason or another. We have no idea what. Um, but there's definitely something weird about that weird little kaiju bug. And yeah, that one thing alone could be the answer to your questions in that sense. There might be something specific about what it can and can't do. Maybe when I was rereading that chapter, I was thinking to myself, is this thing going inside him and then sort of assimilating into his body from the inside, and that's what's causing the transformations? But now that you've said about, you know, the limb dissipating and stuff, I don't. It'd be very interesting to find out more about that. I'd love to see sort of where the authors take that.
The book from author Betty Adams, Humans Are Weird, I Have the Data, is a humorous look at human behavior through the eyes of aliens. This book is arranged in separate reports or essays, documenting the experiences with humanity through the lens of the aliens who have to interact with them. This anthology of short stories and vignettes from alien points of view highlights some of humanity's quirks we can all relate to. Author Betty Adams captures how strange and interesting humans can really be. This is a fun collection of stories you will really get a kick out of. Humans Are Weird, I Have the Data, from author Betty Adams. Order your copy right now on Amazon.